Hey, I'm back, baby.
This an all-out blitz, real hard hits, them other podcast trash, we gon' make them all quit. We cover all the topics with intelligence and logic. I know you wanna score, but ID gon' stop it. We from Texas, so that mean that we Texans. Breaking down the X's and O's, our profession. No complaining, just training, you see the progression. They had a Pro Bowl for talk shows, we get selected. We gon' celebrate every win like a birthday. Ray J with the news, first with all the updates. Spin move on the competition, yeah, we juking them. You not really in touch if you not tuning in. This is Crenshaw, Briggs, and VT. We want the touchdown, we not trying to go for 3. And it's best if you get up out the street, cause them bulls out the pen and they bout to stampede.
Houston Texans, what up?
What up?
What up?
What up?
What up?
What up?
Hey!
Welcome to the Texans Fan Battle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Matthew Briggs, and as always with me, I got my amazing trio. He's not late today, but first off, I got my A1 since day one, Mr. Crenshaw. Say what's up to the folks.
What's the deal?
And BT straight up murdering people on Twitter today.
Murder.
Mr. Brown, Chubby Bear himself. What's going on, bud?
What's going on, guys?
And guys, we got a special guest today. Like we said last week, it's draft season, so we had to get this guy in. We have the feature writer for Team NBS Sports, blogger, blogger, whatever you want to call it. We were arguing this earlier for Zenny62 Media, and also at Consistent Draft Service, the HBCU draft expert, Mr. Bill Carroll. How you doing, sir?
This, is why you lift all those weights, right? To paraphrase the big tuna himself. I prepare. I sleep about 5 hours a night all year round to do this, right? Because like most of you, I have a family, other things I have to do. So I have to mark out 2.5, 3 hours a night every night to just, hey, I'm watching University of Mary tape. I'm watching East Central Oklahoma while other people are sleeping or eating or doing normal people things. So this is why I'm here. This is what it got me here.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. Let's jump into some NFL news. All right, guys. Well, like the video said, lead story. Seems like Mac Jones is being shopped by the New England Patriots. Bill, I'll start with you. What's your thoughts on this?
So Michael McCorkle-Jones, noted child model, and of course, currently an NFL quarterback, is a player who I used to say, whenever someone says, "Oh, prove to me white privilege exists," to be like, "Aha, gotcha." But to be perfectly serious, and I'm at least half joking, he's a guy that has constantly sort of had things be almost perfect around him, right? And all of a sudden, things are not perfect around him for the first time. To his credit, he actually came out as a rookie and played fairly well, right? I think 22 touchdowns, I think 13 interceptions, 51 total QBR as a rookie, and didn't look like it was too big for him. Didn't play great, but didn't look like it was too big for him. And also to his credit, he managed to mostly not go off on people when they went all amateur hour in terms of, the offensive coordination. Well, they didn't have one, right? They decided we don't need an offensive coordinator. Okay, sure. But as I said before, the Patriots are not like other teams. In case you didn't know this already, exhibit number 1,487, that the Patriots are not like other teams. They decided to sort of turn in a group project. I don't know if you guys ever had to turn in a group project. That's what they did. Who needs an offensive coordinator? We'll just turn in a group project. The problem with a group project, just like when you were in college, is that one person takes it seriously, but the rest kind of snooze.
Right.
And it showed, right? It showed in the way that offense looked. It showed in the way that offense played, and it affected Michael McCorkle-Jones. But to his credit, he didn't complain. He didn't whine. When Bailey Zappi was out there for 2 games, you saw a little more life in the offense, but that's partially because Zappi is I'll just say it, a more interesting player to watch. He will try some things that Michael McCorkle-Jones won't. That's not always a good thing because he threw a bunch of interceptions in one of those games he played. But you could see him trying things. You could see him seeing things differently. Michael McCorkle-Jones is a guy that's like, oh, mesh is right there. Here's 6 free yards. Oh, angle route to the running back. There's 8 free yards. He knows you won't go broke picking up change. Bailey Zappe's wired a little differently. He doesn't have much of an arm, which makes it all the more exciting when he decides to push the ball down the field. He was like, you have a friend who's a big guy, like maybe 305, 306, but he thinks he's the world's greatest dancer. And so he's at a wedding, he's at a function, and he decides he's going for it. He busts out all his best moves. And when it works, people are like, wow, look at that big guy go. And then when it doesn't, woo, hospital. So that's what you get when a guy like Bailey Zappe says, I want to attack down the field. And sometimes it works because he throws with great anticipation and great touch, but he just doesn't have the arm to consistently get away with that. So you either go with, boring as dishwater, Michael McCorkle-Jones, but usually dependable if you put the right offense around it, which they did not. Or you say, hey, let's live dangerously with a guy that doesn't have quite enough talent to do it. So if they decide to go with Bailey Zappe, who I'm a fan of, right? He should be a really high-level backup, but hey, roll the dice. If that's what they're feeling, then sure, move him. They've done this before. They've moved quarterbacks a lot. Now, usually they have someone at the starter that's really solidified over the last 20 or so years that made it so they could constantly move out. Hey, Ryan Mallett, want to give me something for him? Sure, I'll take it. Jimmy Garoppolo? Sure. How much for Jacoby Brissett, right? That was a cottage industry in New England for years. But now it's a little different. You don't have a solidified starter. So when you're moving on from a guy, one, because you sabotaged, to be perfectly honest, and two, he also has a fairly low ceiling. I mean, there's no disputing that. You don't look at him and say, man, that guy's a transcendent talent. I can build everything around him, just like with Mahomes. Nobody thinks that. His own family members don't think that. No one thinks that of Michael McCorkle-Jones. So I can understand not being enchanted, not being in love with him. But you can be in like, right? Frankly, they should be drafting the quarterback, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you want to be honest, that's what they should be doing. They should be trying to upgrade that position. They're in a rebuild. They may not know it, but I know it. They don't seem to want to admit it, which is part of why the situation they're in. They won't admit they should rebuild. We're just going to go out there and contend. Okay. I mean, you can, sort of. But at some point, if you stay somewhere between 8 and 10 wins for long enough, you get locked into that forever, right? And I'd say this, sort of feeling it because I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. We are on that same track if we aren't careful. We should just go ahead and stink for a year or two. I know it goes against everything we believe in Pittsburgh, but frankly, just swallow your medicine sometimes and be bad. I know it hurts your feelings. I know it hurts to say, but just do it, right? Because if you buy into this whole let's just go out and contend with not quite a good enough roster thing, it turns into 20 years of doing that before you know it. But yeah, I understand not, like I said, being like, oh, goo-goo-eyed over Michael McCorkle-Jones. I totally get that. But they're playing a very dangerous game.
Okay. I agree with that. BT, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, my main concern about hearing this news is that we were one of the ones where he was shopped around. And obviously, I don't want I can't use his serial killer name. I know that apparently Bill likes what Crenshaw does, is using the serial names, all 3 names. But Mac Jones, I don't see him as a potential franchise quarterback for the Texans. And if we actually picked him up, I would have been real upset. That is actually my biggest thing on this story. And I'm just glad that didn't happen.
Okay. Crenshaw?
Like VT said, I like how Bill used his entire government name. I love that right there. People didn't know his name was Michael. They thought it was Matt, Mac, I mean. But the guy, when they drafted him, it was a privileged draft because he wasn't a first-round talent. I was shocked that they actually got him. And he had a decent rookie year. They made the playoffs, and they just went crazy. But the guy isn't good. He shouldn't be playing at all. They need to find another quarterback. So they're doing the right thing by shopping him. But who's going to pick him up? Who knows?
Like VT said, hopefully it's not the Texans. Well, guys, let's move on to somewhat Texan news. We have Bryce Young at the Raiders for a visit. But, Bill, let's ask this question. If Nick Casario does not go after Bryce Young or CJ Stroud at the second pick, should they go Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, or maybe a Hendon Hooker? What's your opinion?
Well, if you're passing on one of those two with the second pick, my assumption is you decided to go defense. I mean, that's the only reason you would not do that. So you decided instead to, grab Will Anderson, I'm assuming, if that's what you're doing, which is not a terrible idea. I mean, I'm old, so I remember all the furor around the Reggie Bush, Mario Williams days. You guys may not be old enough to remember that, but I was at that draft, and that was all the buzz. Will they take Mario Williams? Will they take Reggie Bush? And both guys ended up being slightly less than everyone thought. But certainly the odds-on favorite early on in the draft process, and even really up until the last couple of days prior to the draft, was still Reggie Bush, right? Because, I mean, he's a sexy pick. He's smart. He's funny. He has a 1,000-watt smile. He's going to get a gazillion endorsements. He's going to fill the stadium. While Mario Williams was a really good football player, but casual fans were just discovering his name during the draft process, right? If you're not a person that pays attention, like who's his name? What's it? Right? So he's not as sexy. He's not as interesting. He's not going to pack out the stadium the same way. People aren't going to be running around with their Mario Williams jerseys quite the same way. You're not going to see a bunch of hot women saying like, "Oh, Mario Williams," right? It's just not quite the same kind of excitement. So it was an unpopular selection. And Mario Williams actually had a very solid career. As once again, I don't know if you guys were following the team in those days. That's a solid career. Not spectacular, but solid. And then Bush had a couple of really good years, but was mostly injury prone, and also not used in such a way that he really got to show what he could do. If he was used more like the way Christian McCaffrey's being used, he would have had a different career arc. But he was born just a few years too early before people said, "Oh, let's split out." You saw Marshall Faulk do it, but that was the list pretty much, right? Like, oh yeah, we're gonna let Marshall Faulk run wide receiver routes. Reggie Bush can run wide receiver routes, and did it all the way back to Helix High School, where of course Alex Smith was his quarterback, right? But they ran wing T, so they weren't running him. They weren't throwing balls to him a lot, but when they did, it often was deep, right? They would, run that little waggle thing, and then boom, you think it's going to be it's play action waggle out. And then and on the backside, Reggie Bush takes off. And, he ran past people in college. Imagine in high school, right? Nobody's within 20 yards of Reggie Bush. Alex Smith is like, oh, okay. Boom, touchdown. But Reggie Bush was treated as a conventional running back. At first, he was a third down back, with sharing the load with Deuce McAllister. And the only time he really was the main guy was 1 year in Detroit, right, where he got the bulk of the carries. He was a guy that shared the load most of his career and only had a couple of really productive seasons. And Mario Williams had, I'd say, 3 or 4 really productive seasons, was above average in the rest of his career. But I think there's 2 definite long-term stars at quarterback in this draft class, and they're the top 2 guys. And then to me, the other guys are no more a sure thing than Jake Haener is. I mean, I think that you could put all the others in a bag and just kind of shake that bag up and reach inside. The most talented of them is Richardson, but he's also the one that scares me the most. It's the classic thing. Super high ceiling, super low floor. How risk averse are you? Are you willing to realize, oh my God, he's a more athletic black Jake Locker? Are you okay with that if that ends up happening? Because he's a guy that can do everything at times. At times, his footwork has been like a trip to the circus at times, right? And just like a trip to the circus, at times it's fun and exciting and everybody's all woo cheering. And also there's a time you have to clean up after the elephants. You get both of those things when you're watching Anthony Richardson. You both get cleaning up after the elephants, and you also get like a high wire act, beautifully executed. He does throw at times with touch and anticipation, but he also stares it down at times. He doesn't progress quickly enough through his progressions. He will definitely take risks that he should not take and throw some, oh my God, what were you doing, interceptions. At times, linebackers are invisible to him. If you know how to deep drop your linebackers and they have good hands, you might have a linebacker lead the league in interceptions against him. I mean, there's some things he's got to work on. To his credit, he's working on them. He's aware of them. He's got a good sense of his weaknesses. Was there literally swapping paint with Stacey Dales, trying to get in position to talk to him at the combine at the podium. And somebody asked him about his strengths, weaknesses. He broke himself down actually very accurately. Some guys act like they don't have weaknesses. I give him credit. He said, I rush, right? He actually nailed it. He talked about how, my feet are too close together. He nailed it. Like, he really did a good job breaking himself down. But those things are not as easy to fix as people think. Oh, yeah, he'll just get some NFL coaching and boom, bang, alakazam. It's not that simple, people. He's played one way since he was probably 8 or 9 years old. You don't just wave your magic wand that all goes away. Will Levis is kind of the same thing, but less, right? A little less talented, not quite as broken in terms of his mechanics. But another guy who will literally just drill a defender in the chest a couple of times a year where you go like, what the? I mean, literally, it's like, huh. And the thing that kills you is there's a receiver running free on that same play, right? And so, like, wide open, just naked, as we say in football parlance. But you instead decide to just try to drill it in to the underneath, dig to the tight end, which was double covered, huh? That's bold strategy, Cotton. I don't think it'll work out for him. So you've got to break those guys down and build them up. Like, that's a project. Hendon Hooker is a guy that would have probably been in the fight for the second quarterback off the board, if not for the injury. Allen, since we know full names here, Allen is actually his first name. Just like his father, Allen Hooker was a terrific quarterback. I got to watch his father at NC A&T. Unfortunately, his father was a black quarterback before that was cool. But now we get to see, just like with Kyler Murray's dad, right? Kevin Murray, the same deal. Black at the wrong time. But Allen Hendon Hooker is a guy that plays in admittedly a simplified offense, right? I'm not one read. People say one read. That's not true. But they do dictate the read, right? They try to make it so that you have a high-low, and you can take either one. Or you'll have, like I said, they run mesh a lot. They run a lot of like Y sail. They run a lot of spot routes where you should have someone either breaking free over your face or you can work to the second read. So it's not a one read. People say that one read off. No, there's no such thing as one read offense, but reads are dictated, right? It's this or that. It's binary is really what it is. But he does it well. He operates it at a very high level. And frankly, nobody's running, like the Elway offense that he ran at Stanford in 1983. Like, nobody's doing that. Nobody is. So don't give me this person's offense. Now look at them all. They're all simplified, frankly, from what they were 30, 40 years ago. But his, because of the tempo, they are very up-tempo. They stay in the same formations, so they can go so fast. So he hasn't had to work through some of the things that NFL quarterback has to work through. But he's very similar, actually, to Stroud, just in a even more simplified offense. But they're similar guys, physically similar. But one is younger, right? Stroud is significantly younger by over 2 years, so that makes a big difference. And so when people say, "Oh, Hooker's rising up the boards," well, one, no, I mean that's not how it works. Because the NFL looks at things differently than fans do, and the media does. When you hear someone's rising, it's just that the fans and the media are now catching on to where the NFL always was.
Gotcha.
That's when you hear someone's quote unquote rising. No, they were always there for the NFL. NFL boards change very little from the beginning to the end of the year. The only things that really make big changes, one, significant injury. That's when a guy will legitimately slide. Serious off-field stuff. That's when a guy will legitimately move. A guy legitimately moves up, like seriously, like more than just a couple of spots up. One is if he is dramatically better as an athlete than everyone thought, right? If he's not a little better, I mean dramatically better. And even then it's not, 50 spots. It's 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe 16, 17 spots you might move. The NFL usually knows what you are, even before the season begins. They've been looking at you since you were in high school. They know who all the 5 stars are, who the 4 stars are, and especially the guys that end up going to big schools. They know who those guys are. Some of the guys who are 1 and 2 stars, they find out about. Those are the guys they find out about. But they've been looking at, the big time dudes, I mean, Will Anderson was known to NFL guys, when he was 17 and a half years old. So those guys are on the radar, as they say.
Yep.
And you stay there until you do something to move yourself up or down, right? You start here, and that's where you will stay unless you move yourself up or down. So the whole thing about rocketing up boards, it's a cool thing to say. It's not a reality. It's not how things actually work in the real NFL world. If you're not drafting either Coleridge, Bernard, Stroud Jr., yes, right? I love that his first name is actually Coleridge, right? Especially as an English major, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, rhyme with Ancient Mariner. But he's right now the top quarterback on most teams' boards. Partially because, full-grown man, right? Over 6'2", 218 pounds. While people don't completely wipe you out for being, under 6 feet tall the way they used to, there's still a preference for the guy who's got a larger frame. And so there's a couple of teams that aren't there, and there's at least one or two teams that really like Anthony Richardson. But for the most part, everybody has Coleridge, Bernard, Stroud, boom, Jr. up there. And then it's a fight for two between a couple of people. Usually it's Bryce Young who wins it, right? Most of the time. But there's a couple of teams that don't have him at number 2. But if you're not taking one of those two, you should probably draft defense, unless you are super sold on one of the other quarterbacks. And I'm not super sold on any of the quarterbacks. And I like some of the guys like, Dorian Thompson-Robinson or Jake Hayner as much as, and I'm going to get them cheaper than some of these guys that people are pushing up into the, top 10. And I don't see those other guys as top 10 picks.
Okay.
Very interesting. All right. Well, BT, Crenshaw, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So you mentioned that basically if you're not taking Bryce or Stroud, then go defense, right? So this brings us to a question that's actually going on right now on Texans Twitter, which is if Cassera doesn't take Bryce or CJ and he takes defense, and I'm not even going to talk about Will Levis or Richardson right now because you're basically saying go defense if you don't take those two. But if Cassera doesn't take a quarterback, meaning those two, and takes defense, do you think he's making a mistake, or do you think that that's right for his board?
BT doing my job for me. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
I don't think it's a mistake. I think that you should always go by what your board says. Most mistakes happen look at what the Browns did, right? They had 2 first-rounders. They had what their board said, and then they got all excited and ignored what their board said. And both those guys were out of the league in 3.5 years, right? So don't do that. Don't go out and supposedly talk to a homeless man or whatever it is you do and ignore your board. Don't do that. Go by your board. You have a bunch of people that you pay a reasonable amount of money to tell you who the better players are. Don't get a wild hair. Don't get a whim. Don't just suddenly wake up with a feeling and ignore all that work. Imagine how frustrating that is. All of the Courtyard by Marriott breakfasts you've had to eat, all the miles in your Enterprise rental car you've had to log, all the flights, all your missing your kids' games, missing your kids' birthdays, all the stuff you did to help them put this board together, that all of a sudden at the last follow up says, "No, I'm not going to do that."
So what you're saying is that stick to being Kevin Costner, right? It's always your pick right there. Stay true.
Emotion is a beautiful thing, and it's what makes us human, right? I love that. But you should not be using emotion to make business decisions, right? That's not how you should be using your emotions. Use your emotions to make personal decisions, not personnel decisions. They're similar, but not the same.
All right. Crenshaw, you got anything to add?
No. Well, yeah. Can you tell me, besides size, what on Bryce Christopher Young?
There we go. Yes. My man. A little virtual death.
Yeah, but besides size, what you don't like about him?
I like everything about him. He's a super competitor. He's a really terrific all-around athlete. And once again, as I'm going to reveal my age, he really reminds me a lot of Fran Tarkenton. Doesn't scramble around quite as much, but a lot of similarities. great sense of the dramatic, and I mean that in a good way, right? He plays his best when his best is needed. Despite his size, he's not afraid of taking a hit. He'll hang in there and take a lick. I think people analyze his size, right? He wasn't a guy who was 6'3" and 225 until recently, and then all of a sudden woke up this size. No, he's been this size for a little while and played effectively. He doesn't get a lot of balls batted down. He's in the bottom 22.5 percentile in college quarterbacks for balls tipped or batted. So that means that there's 77.5 quarterbacks have balls batted or tipped more than him, right? So he knows, think about it. Shorter quarterbacks are good at what? Finding a passing lane. Why? Because they have to be good at it. Right. There was a year where the starter who led the entire NFL, I apologize if this name brings you pain, but there was a guy who was literally 6'7" and managed to lead the league in batted balls. His name was Brock Osweiler. So height is not the secret to not get your balls batted down. Knowing when and where to be as a quarterback in the pocket is the secret to not getting balls batted down. So I think that he will be okay. I think he will be just fine. I am more concerned, frankly, about the way the team builds their offensive line. If you have a really strong, guard, center guard trio, you'll be probably just fine with him, because that's the most important thing. If you look at how teams like the Saints built their offensive line because of Drew Brees, and how other teams have built their offensive line because of their, quarterbacks that are more vertically challenged, you may not spend all the money in the world on tackles. These guys are usually pretty good at making people miss, and they navigate the pocket well. Why? Because they have to, once again. But you've got to make sure that guard, center guard trio is strong, doesn't get a lot of push in the face, which is bad for every quarterback. I mean, Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr., what was his great kryptonite? What? Interior pass rush, right? That was how you turned him from a god into a man, from a goat into a So nobody wants that. But especially if you already are sort of struggling to get vision downfield, and now there's this coming at you, right? That's what makes you ineffective. So build your offensive line the right way, and you'll be okay with him. I just think people are, like I said, reading too much into some of it. I think he'll be just fine. He may not be a superstar, but I think worst case scenario, he's going to be a pretty, really good long-term starter, if not great.
BT, you taking notes?
I am.
BT's been a hater of Bryce Christopher Young since
because of his size. I mean, I will say I am starting to somewhat come around. I had to defend him a couple times, which you never saw me doing that, right? I even talked about him on my last video, so I'm coming around.
Grab some of his basketball tape. You get an idea of not only his natural leadership ability, but also, like I said, that vision, right? Now, obviously, it's different in basketball because you don't have to worry about people, knocking the bejesus out of you, or you shouldn't have to worry about it. But you still see how quickly and accurately he makes decisions. And I just think that he has very little bust factor. He may not be a superstar, but he has very little bust factor. I'll be shocked if he isn't at least a top 13 quarterback in the NFL once he gets established.
Bill, before we move on, I got a question for you.
Yes.
One of the draft prospects at quarterback is being represented by the same guy. We will not be named. I can't even say his name correctly. But does that play a factor for the Texans draft him or not? Because we say no, but the Texans fandom say yes. So be the deciding factor.
Smart teams don't worry about anything other than, does this player do what we need him to do? Is this a very good player? And will this player fit what we like to do, fit our scheme? If you start worrying about who someone's agent is, who someone's friend is, where they went to school, who they're dating, I mean, what? It's already hard enough to do this job, right? It's super hard to find good players. It's incredibly difficult. The best in the world at it still missed. I mean, the best quarterback evaluator in the history of the planet might have been Bill Walsh, and he fell in love with Rick Mirer. So it's hard to evaluate players. So when you say, there's this extraneous stuff that's nothing to do with how someone plays on the field, and how tall they are, how strong they are, whatever. There's things that do matter, right? But when outside of a person's actual character, outside of their talent, outside of their production and their playing, anything else is just that. I mean, it's just noise. Just do the stuff that you have to. It's hard enough to do the stuff you actually have to do to evaluate players. Don't bring in extra stuff. Why make your job harder?
All right. Well, let's move on to the NFL draft. The reason why we are here.
The Houston Texans select.
All right, we're on the clock, and we're gonna turn the pick, and we're gonna make you a Houston Texan.
All right. Well, we had a list of sleepers, but beginning in pre-production, Bill made us throw them all out the window. So
I didn't make you. I just want to make it clear that I have a different definition.
So Bill, thank you for saying that. So why don't you tell our fans the same thing? What makes a sleeper in your opinion?
When I see a guy who has a second or third round grade and someone says sleeper, I'm like, So even a fourth round grade to me isn't really sleepers. To me are guys that NFL teams are still doing work on, right? If this is someone they've known about forever, that's not a sleeper to me. So I'll tell you about guys that I feel are truly sleepers. And I was talking recently to a young man, an offensive guard from the Air Force, about some of the toughest players he's played against. And he mentioned two defensive tackles by name, back to back. And I made me feel smart because it's two players I love. Scott Matlack from Boise State. And the only thing that I'm not in love with is he's older. Another guy that took that extra COVID year. I really feel like he could have come out last year. But he gives you that versatility. He's got a little bit of like Justin Smith or Trace Armstrong to him. He can play the 3. He can play the 4-eye. He can play the 5. He can even play a little bit further out. He's not a true outside pass rusher, but he's a really good interior pass rusher. He's good against the run. He has really great power. Like he's really strong. He's a technician. He's got a little bit of mean to him. I mean, not not too much. Like, he's not out there like heel stuff like some of the, like Trevor Penning. He's not doing that.
He's not Ndamukong Suh, right?
No, not Trevor Penning, not Ndamukong Suh. No, but like a guy that will put it on a guy right up to the whistle. He's not out there doing crazy things. And I feel like the world is too low on him. The football world is too low on him. I've had a chance to talk to about 3 or 4 scouts, and they're like lukewarm on him, and it's like, take another look. I just think he's better than most people think, and to me, that's a sleeper, right? That's a guy that some people have rated as a late day 3 guy. Some people have rated as an undrafted free agent, and like I said, he's not super old. He's not quite 23, even with the extra COVID year. So he's not super, super old. He's got decent arm length. 32 and a half is decent, not great. He ran right about 5 flat, came in at 308. He's 6'4" and 1/8. But when he slimmed down, he has slimmed down at times. He can run under 5. But he's a guy that gives you that consistent push. And I really wish he'd come out, like I said, last year, because his best year was last year. He had 41 tackles, 7 sacks, playing on the interior and forced a fumble. Had a great year, and then he had a not quite as great year this year, but parts because teams were game planning for him, which I would have too. Dropped down, was productive. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he had 48 tackles from the interior, but only 2.5 sacks. But still got consistent pressure. And considering he's playing 3 and 4-eye most of the time, that's still not exactly embarrassing. And if he did the same thing at Alabama, people would be talking about a second rounder, especially with the same size and power that he has. So that's a guy I really like. And the other guy that this offensive line was talking to from Air Force mentioned by name was Jonah Tavai. And that's another guy that I just can't understand why people aren't talking about more. The 3 sort of holy trinity of wildly underestimated, in my opinion, defensive tackles in this class are Dante Stills from West Virginia, who I think people are finally waking up to. The aforementioned Mr. Scott Matlack, and the third in that holy trinity of wildly underestimated offensive tackles to me is Jonah Tavai. Now, Tavai is a little smaller, so Matlack's over almost 6'4" and over 300 pounds, or he came down at like 290 something for his pro day, but plays at a little over 300 pounds. Tavai is right at 290 and about 6 feet on the nose, so he's a smaller guy. He's a
He came from San Diego State, correct?
Yes, sir. There we go. but that's a guy that means is legitimately a sleeper because once again, NFL teams know about him. I'm not saying they don't know at all, but I think that they're missing. To me, they're missing on him a little bit. I think that he probably, if he gets drafted at all, will be very late day 3. But I'm a big fan of his, and I think that he'll probably be a rotational guy just because of the size issue. He'll never be big enough, I don't think, to be a full-time interior player on defense. But I just think he's better than most people think. I'll give you a bonus one. No, I'll give you 2 real quick. Dom Peterson is another similar guy. Dom's right at around 300, 299 to be exact, but right around 300. Once again, squatty-bodied guy, about 6 feet on the nose, but really good technique. Can he play on the nose? He's done it. I don't think that's his best position. I think he's a 3 tech, but at times in college they asked him to play like a 1 technique or sometimes a cock nose shade. But I like him a lot. And I think he has a real chance to be, once again, a productive rotational player. And another guy who's an actual tweener. He's played some outside and some inside is Tyler Lacey from Oklahoma State. Once again, this is my idea of a sleeper. Because most people see him in the 250s. And I would consider him, I'm not talking about super early, but into the 5th, early 6th, I would consider him. I think he's going to make a team and then be a pleasant surprise. He only came in the upper 270s. He's played heavier than that, but once again, he slimmed down to run. But he can play at probably as high as the low 290s, and he's legitimately just under 6'4", I think 6'3" and 7/8. He's got long arms, and he's got big hands, and so that helps. I mean, 33 and a quarter-inch arms and big, giant hands, 10 and 7/8, right? That's almost 11-inch hands. So that's like 2 people's hands or 2, smaller hands. But he's a big guy, ran right around 5'1". But I think he's probably capable of running better than that. Not that matters that much for the position he plays. But he's a guy that is going to give you some scheme versatility. He can play basically all up and down the line. You could ask him to slim down and maybe try to make him. I wouldn't do that because I don't think he's ever going to be quite twitchy and bendy enough to be a real outside pass rusher. But he is a guy that if you play like those radar defenses, once again, the Patriots, right? You play those amoebas, those radars, where you just want guys to kind of walk around, move around. He's perfect for that.
When you talk about Dom Peters, you talk about the one that played some edge at Nevada, correct?
Well, I mean, he's 6 feet and 299, so I wouldn't say. I mean, they moved him around the line a little bit.
He moved. That's what I'm saying. He moved. He moved around a little bit.
He played some 5 tech. He did play some 5 tech. Yeah. Look at you knowing football. I like that.
You might think he has a football podcast or something, I mean,
I my favorite thing of I love the season. Don't get me wrong. I love to play on the field, but when it comes to draft, that's my favorite part of the whole.
Yes, sir.
Whole year. I love it.
Yep.
So, well, Bill, let me ask you a question before I send it to these guys. What is your perfect fit for the Texans throughout the whole draft? Throw some of those sleepers in there if you can.
Okay, so we're talking about late. You're talking about late, like day 3 guys?
Yeah, because obviously first, second, and third, and possibly fourth is going to be quarterback, receiver, edge, center. Yep. So tell us what at day 3. Who, if you're the Houston Texans, who are you going after?
Yeah, so that's
RDs.
This is this is why I do this. If he should fall into the 5th round, if there's 2 tackles I'm a huge fan of, and I think worst case scenario, I mean literally the worst case scenario, these guys are going to be, swing tackles, but I see either of them could someday develop into starters. One is Earl Bostic Jr. from Kansas. And I think word has gotten out on him a little bit. Like when I was talking about him a couple of months ago, people were like, now I'm getting a little more traction there. I think once again, the NFL has always been higher in him than, draft Twitter or just fans have been. So word's getting out on him. That's the first thing. So if he's there, say at pick, I would take him as high as 104. But if somehow he makes it to you at pick 161, run. If you jump over people if you have to, but get him if he's there. Then at pick 188, there's so many players I like in this class. I'm assuming, you guys can use everything, so that makes it a little bit easier.
Kick us while we're down, Bill. Kick us while we're down.
You know what I mean? But I mean, like that makes it exciting, right? Because you don't have to say, "Oh, I have to pick this." No, pick good players.
You can just close your eyes and throw a dart on the board.
Just pick good football players, right? If you just do that, just pick good football players. So I will say that if indeed you find your way here, if you're okay with him being a smaller tight end, and he is a smaller tight end, he's like a mini tight end. I think he came in at 6'1" and 7/8 and 241, but a freak athlete, 39-inch vert. Ran in the, I think maybe 4.51, 4.52, low 4.5s. Terrific athlete. Pocket rocket tight end. Kid named Griffin Hebert from Louisiana Tech. If you haven't watched him, watch him. Watch the way he just runs away from people at the tight end position. He's probably the best pure athlete at tight end in the entire draft class. And the only reason people don't talk about him enough is Louisiana Tech. But watch him against SMU. Watch that game. He's good, period. He's good against everybody. But that game, and you probably could even take him with one of your other 6th-round picks because for some reason people don't like him very much. But I do. And once again, the one thing I'll say is he's never going to be a, full service tight end. A guy that's like, hey, we're going to run to your side. We need you to go out there and block Myles Garrett. Like that's not going to be him. Like I would not recommend that. But can he block linebackers? Sure. And, he can get downfield and slap safeties around, that kind of thing. But he'll never be a guy that's going to just line up, the stuff that Jason Witten used to do. Just line up and block top-tier DNs. Like, that's not him. But he can do everything else you want from a tight end. Frankly, the tight end position nowadays really is just a big receiver. And he is that. He's a terrific receiver of the football and terrific after the catch. Big fan. Wide receiver, Xavier Gipson. And once again, word is starting to get out on him, right? This guy I've been high on since last year. And now people are saying, oh, yeah, Xavier Gipson, yeah, he's good. So it's always fun for me to see, how they're growing up before my very eyes. But he's a guy who can do a little bit of everything at the tight end position. And if he'd done it at a bigger school, not at Stephen F. Austin, but at a bigger school, everybody would know about it because he's got
I went to Sam Houston State, so that was my rival. So
okay. Well, Sam Houston State always has. I mean, that's a quarterback factory, man. All right, yeah. I mean, Bo Levi, Mitchell. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, no, sorry, that's not Bo Levi. I mean, not who's the one I'm thinking of. He's in the CFL now. What's the kid's name?
Are you talking about the one that came from Oklahoma for?
Why are you going back to Rhett Bomar days? Oh,
Rhett Bomar.
Yeah. We'll swap Rhett Bomar stories someday. But Xavier Gipson is super fast, right? Sub 4.4. Not the biggest cat in the world, but what makes up for it is vertical, right? He can jump. And I think most importantly, he really has a good sense of where to be on the field. So if you're looking for that guy who can work the middle but just run away from people, that's a guy to consider. A similar guy is actually there's a lot of fast receivers, but they're usually smaller. So the guys who are big and fast are harder to come by. So Matt Landers is a guy that if you're looking for big and fast, he's a bit of a project. He's a guy that will probably be helping on special teams for a while before he really sort of rounds into everything that he can be as a receiver. But if you want a big, fast guy, that's him. He's big, he's fast, he's raw, but it's not all his fault because I'm not trying to be mean, but I watched Arkansas. If you've watched Arkansas, you know what I'm talking about. They didn't seem to always have the best ideas about what to do with designing a passing attack. Terrific in designing run plays. Just their passing game was at times a bit of an adventure. But he played well. He was really good. And he just wasn't asked to do certain things. They basically just asked him to, hey, run that way really fast and jump, and we'll throw the ball in your direction. And that seemed to be at times what they were doing. And he wasn't asked to work a lot of the more intricate route concepts because he didn't seem to care about those kinds of things. I mean, I'm just trying to be honest. Like, they seem to just usually, he would almost always be, I mean, not just, like they ran him really close to the sidelines. I hope that was on purpose. I hope he wasn't just a guy that drifted close to the sidelines. But he made a lot of spectacular catches, though, by the sidelines. He would get his toes down, and it's like, oh, look at you. But they just didn't have a great passing attack. And so he wasn't in the spotlight as much as he maybe could have been if they just had a better sense of how to do things. But he's a guy that's a really interesting project that somebody's going to get somewhere probably in the 6th round. Because somebody take him maybe a little early just because of his height, weight, speed combination. I guess. But I would recommend to get the right bang for your buck, maybe to waiting to around this point. Now, there's a lot of really good receivers that are going to go late in this class because there's so many good receivers. It's a super deep class. I'll give you a couple of my favorites that are going to go late who do have size. And one of them is one of the stars on what I call my all-name team, Jadakiss Bonds. So I heard the walkout music we had, shout out to Jadakiss, but probably, obviously that great Southern work, you have a little bit of that dirty South feel on the walkout music. Thank you so much for that. Got you hyped. But Jadakiss Bonds from Hampton is a guy who's got a big frame, first of all, which unlike a lot of the receivers in this class, is a smaller group for the most part. A lot of 6 feet and unders in this draft class. So Jadakiss Bonds' size helps him. He's almost 6'3", 6'2" and 3/4. Came in at about 205 at the HBCU Combine, and he runs in the low 4.5s. So hand timed because they don't let track the time at the HBCU Combine. So even if you add, let's say 600th of a second, you're still talking about mid to upper 4.5s with a frame that size. He has really good body control. He runs good routes for a guy that size, and I think he has real potential. I'll give you one other one. Shaquan, a.k.a. Shaq Davis from South Carolina State. And he's another bigger-bodied receiver in a smaller-bodied class, right? There's a lot of smaller receivers in this draft class. So he gives you that size you don't get. I mean, he's legitimately almost 6'4". Almost 6'5". Sorry, he's over 6'4". He's about 6'4" and a half, 6'4" and 5/8. Came in at 217 pounds at the HBCU Combine. Not quite as fast as Jadakiss. He ran in the low 4.6s hand time. So even when you add, once again, some extra time to it, you're probably talking about 4.65-ish, somewhere in that 4.61 to 4.65 range once you add in, what it would have been in electronic time. But once again, he's a possession receiver and a jump ball guy, and he's terrific at those two things. So he's a guy that can give you that red zone menace. I'm going to jump back over the defense. I really like the safeties and corners in this draft class. I think it's a super deep, especially super, super deep corner class. There's going to be starting corners that people are going to find in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. I'm going to give you a guy that can probably play maybe even 2 or 3 different positions on the back end of the defense. A kid named Bentley Sanders from Nevada. And I spotted him, thank you, Dom Peterson, scouting Dom Peterson. And I noticed, man, who's this tough little corner they got? He can play in the slot, maybe even free safety in a pinch, but he's like a made-to-order boundary corner. And he's a good tackler, and he's tough, and he's strong, and he's athletic enough. Not a freak, but he's athletic enough that he can hold up outside. I think he has real potential. I think he shows, because he's played multiple positions, he's got really good football IQ. I first spotted him at South Florida, and he fell off my radar. I didn't realize he transferred, and I was like, I don't know what happened to him. The big knock on him is size. He's 5'8" and 1/8. So he's going to probably be, slot only at the next level. But 4'4", 140, and like a tough guy. I mean, like a legit tough guy despite his size. He's not afraid to come up there and put it on you, even though he's, 173 pounds. So he's going to go probably as an undrafted free agent just because of that. But he's going to be great on special teams. And then somebody's going to get hurt. And he's going to be asked to go out there and play some nickel or play some corner. He's like a miniature Avonte Maddox. For those who remember him from Pitt, who found his way to the Eagles and was really supposed to be a special team backup guy. And then they had a huge spate of injuries a couple of years ago, where at one point, all of the guys who were starters coming out of camp were injured. They went through, all of the starters were gone. So Avonte Maddox, as a rookie, started at 3 different positions for the Eagles. He played nickel, he played outside, and he played free safety as a rookie for the Eagles because of that. And I think Bentley Sanders, who's a miniature version of Avonte, could do something similar. So that's a guy I really like. Let me at least mention the guys on your list because I don't want to completely ignore them. Andre Yoshibas is a guy that I really like from Punahou High School, right? The same high school that gave us Barack Hussein Obama, but terrific all-around athlete, a guy who was a terrific three-sport athlete in high school, a terrific two-sport athlete in college, has the highest scoring heptathlon score in this past track season, and set the Ivy League record for the heptathlon. Also holds the Ivy League record for the 60 meters and ran the fastest 60 meters indoors the past indoor track season. So he's a terrific athlete, 6'3" and 1/8, and 200 pounds. In fact, 206 pounds. So good size, tremendous athlete. I mean, remember, this is a guy who, hurdles, sprints, pole vaults, throws a javelin. I mean, to be a heptathlete, you got to be a great athlete. And he is. He hasn't been asked to do some things he'll be asked to do at the NFL level, but I think he will do them. I think he's still underrated by some people. The word is very much out on Jonathan Mingo. I think that him being a fifth rounder is gone. I think that the word has gotten out on him. So he's probably gone somewhere in the mid third, but it's still worth it. I mean, that's still good value.
Him and Sidney Rice. Sidney Rice is, I think he's.
What was she? Sidney Rice.
Yeah, I don't know why I say Sidney. Man, my name is.
Yeah, I might because he's somewhat similar. But the problem with Rasheed, not problem, but Rasheed is a guy that's got to work on his mental part of his game, his attitude. He's a guy that can sometimes. I don't want to trash the kid because he's a good kid, but he's wired in a certain way that he has to be coached a certain way. So he can't go to every team. I'll put it that way. He needs to go to a team that has a more nurturing approach, but not soft. Nurturing but stern. Like they want you to feel loved and feel appreciated, but expectations are expectations. You have to meet them. If you're too soft with him, he won't do all the things he's supposed to do. And if you're too hard on him, he'll shut it down. So you got to be just right. But if he goes the right situation, he's going to surprise people in the good way. If he goes the wrong situation, he'll surprise people in the bad way.
All right.
Payne, a good all-around again. But I want to touch briefly on Zach Kuntz. So back at Penn State, when they had Gesicki and Kuntz, they might have had the greatest height, weight, speed. Like they would have won the RAS Bowl, the Relative Athletic Score Bowl for tight ends when they had both those guys at Penn State back in 2017, 2018. But he got stuck behind other people at Penn State, transfers out to Old Dominion. And he had a decent year this year, but the year prior, he was over 700 yards in receptions, 9 touchdowns. And then a little bit down this year, but throw on his junior tape. He's an unstoppable killing machine. And when you think about a guy that's 110 high hurdles champion, who's that size, right? You think about corners and receivers, maybe even running backs sometimes being 110 high hurdles champs, not tight ends. So that's cool when you see a guy who has that kind of body control, speed, and agility from the tight end position. Still a work in progress a little bit as a blocker, partially because he is so darn tall. It's a little bit more difficult. Once you get 6'5" is about perfect. Once you get a little bit over that, getting your pad level low, getting your hips aligned and things like that, a little more of a challenge. But I think he'll get there. He gives good effort as a blocker. He just doesn't quite understand fully how to get all of that body in the right position to really drive people. So right now he's a really good sort of position blocker. His technique is solid, but he's not getting, for a guy who's a good athlete, he doesn't have quite as much push as you'd like to get there. But if he learns more about how to align his hips, drop down a little bit more, and run his feet, with a little more consistency, he'll become a better all-around blocker. Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple more guys that are not on the list, and then I'll touch on one or two more on the list. I really, 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 really like this wide receiver class. And one guy that people are just way too low on for reasons I'll never fully understand is Jalen Moreno-Cropper. And he is one of those guys that does a little bit of everything at a fairly high level. People don't think of him as a deep threat, but he's very, very fast. He can work the middle of the field. He's fearless. He'll go into dark places to go get the football. Doesn't play with fear in his heart. Is a good route runner, very good after the catch. Not huge, but not small. I mean, he's probably right around average. I think he came in at 188 or 189. He plays a little heavier, but once again, like other guys, he drops 6-7 pounds, try to run faster. And he did. He ran fast. So I just feel like if you are looking for a a wide receiver that you can get 5th, 6th round, who is probably going to end up being better than people think, that's a guy I would throw out there. I mean, he runs 4.4 flat, even though he's not seen as a deep threat. But he can get deep. He can, and once again, he'll work every level of field. He's a guy who can win on all 3 levels. He can run those shallow crosses. And speed really helps you on those, right? Because especially against zone, you're forcing someone to try to stay with you. And, 5'11 is 5'11. It's not tiny. He plays in the low 180s. He dropped down to 172 for the combine to run fast, and he did. I'm sure he's back up probably 6, 7, 8, 9 pounds back to where he was during the season. Now he's back to probably lifting more and running less. But if you want to get sold on him, watch the games where he's played up in level of competition against Pac-12 teams, against the USCs, against UCLA. Look at how good he is against those guys who are supposed to be better. And he ate those guys up. So I just feel like people are, like I said, a little bit sleeping on him, a little bit not realizing everything he could be. He can also throw the ball. He's got a couple of touchdown passes on his resume. So there's also that, if you like that. He gives you that little trick play, stuff that you get from like the Hines Wards and Antoine Randall L types. He can run those jet sweeps. He can he's really, really got great body control. He's just not super physically strong. Like, if there's one legitimate knock, and I have to agree with it, is he can get, you can take him, you can redirect him, you can knock him off his path fairly easily. He's not a guy who's breaking tackles out there, but he is good after the catch. And he's really loose. Like, he's really limber. He's really got, like I said, really good body control. I'd like to see him get stronger. I'd like to see him work better against press, which is his main nemesis now. I'd like to see him work back to the football a little bit more on some routes. And I'd like to see him be a little more competitive at the catch point. But other than those, everything else, I give him, B+ to A at everything else. And I just think people are too low on him.
Bill, I would love to hear the whole list, but we are kind of timed.
Okay, got it.
So we're going to move on to our fans' favorite, where we ask you a question, but here's a little video for you. Right. I'll let Mr. BT start off with the question.
Okay.
So I think for Briggs and Crenshaw, this might be the first time that they're really talking to you, but I've talked to you before, and I call you an encyclopedia worth of knowledge. And what I want to know is how did you get to where you are, where you literally, in my opinion, if I throw out a name, you know them, and you know everything about them. So how did you get that way?
So in addition to sacrificing hours of sleep, which may not be good for you, so don't do it. Don't do it, kids. Get all your rest, drink your milk, eat your vegetables. It doesn't have to be dairy milk, it could be oat milk, soy milk, whatever it works. But when I was a fairly small child, the game of football grabbed me. I saw my first football game at the age of 3, in fact, my 3rd birthday. My father was broke. He was a graduate student at the time, which equals broke. And it's like, what am I going to do? Right. So he takes me to a football game. I'm luckily a September baby, so easy. Takes me to a game. He's like, well, we'll see how long he wants to stay. If he decides he gets too fidgety, we'll go home. I sat through the entire game, mesmerized. And I still remember parts of the game. So it was NC State versus University of North Carolina. And Don McCauley, who played about 8 years in the league with mostly the Colts, and had 1 year with the Jets. Don't quote me on that. He finished with somebody else. His last year was with another team. But spent about 8 years with the Colts and was one of the first really great third down receiving backs in the NFL at the time. But he went wild on NC State for about 228 or something yards. At that time, it was the single game record, which has since been broken in Carolina. And that was it. Like, I was locked. Football, and me. By the time I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was taking notes on games. Just for what reason, I do not know. And then I played a little bit poorly. And by the time I got to high school, I realized, like, I'm not going to be able to play this game at a high level. Like, that's not going to work out for the kid. My best sport was wrestling, which nobody cares about, at least not where I grew up. Like, if I grew up in Iowa, I guess it would have been cooler. But I grew up in Virginia, where wrestling was like something you did if you weren't either to, get ready for another sport or, because that's the sport you're good at. For me, unfortunately, wrestling was the sport I was good at. But I played poorly. And then I even decided, I hadn't gotten the hint from being bad in high school, I decided to try to walk on in college. But I have a statistic. I have a blocked punt from a very, very rainy game against the Shaw Bears, Shaw University in North Carolina. I blocked a punt. That is my statistic. Was L3 on kickoff coverage. I was not good enough, but I was out there trying to do it because my intense love for this game. But even years before that, during my early teens, I started writing to NFL teams. This is pre-internet, so there's no email. So I would write letters. I didn't mention my name. I would just say who I am, what I do. I'm interested in learning more about your organization, blah, blah. Well, most of them would send back form letters like, keep cheering, little buckaroo, or whatever, that kind of thing. But I got one handwritten letter back from the late, great Bill Nunn, who finally made the Hall of Fame, who was a part-time employee of the Pittsburgh Steelers on and off for decades. And he was, by training, a newspaper man. His father was the founder of the Pittsburgh Courier, which at one point was the most circulated paper in the United States because Black people in Los Angeles would read the Pittsburgh Courier. It was distributed nationally, not by being shipped or shipped by plane, but by sleeping car porters on the trains that were more prevalent in the 20s, 30s in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in the United States. And so sleeping car porters would pick it up in Pittsburgh and distribute it all over the country. So the Pittsburgh Courier had a West Coast bureau. Years before USA Today was a national newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier was. And he worked for his father as a sports editor. He had played football in high school, but was a basketball player when he was in college at West Virginia State University, which at that time was an HBCU. It now is actually a majority white institution, but at the time it was majority Black. And one of his teammates was a man named Joseph Gilliam, who was the father of Jefferson Street Joe Gilliam, who later played for the Steelers. But Joe Gilliam was a great defensive coordinator for Tennessee State University, which is then called Tennessee A&I University, under the late great John Merritt, who's one of the greatest great coaches, period. But he really was great at finding defensive talent, like people like Too Tall Jones and many others. But I became obsessed with the game. I wrote this letter to him, and he actually wrote back, right, an actual handwritten letter, which God. Please, my mother hasn't thrown away. My mother doesn't always ask, I should have taken all my stuff when I left home many years ago, joined the Army, but I didn't take all my stuff. So sometimes I'll ask about something. It's like, I threw that away years ago. No! But hopefully somewhere hidden away in my mother's house is that letter, that very kind letter that Bill Nunn wrote to me. And he talked about what matters and what doesn't matter in his approach and what he thinks about in generalities. Like, he didn't give away all the secret sauce, but in generalities, why he doesn't care about some things, why he cares more about other things. And that fueled the fire. So by the time I was in my mid-teens, I was writing for a newspaper. And it was a weekly, it was no big deal. It was a small weekly newspaper in my hometown called The Answer newspaper that a man named James Mims ran. And I wrote for them until I got to college. I wrote some for my school newspaper. And I started trying to figure out ways to be around the game when it was very abundantly clear I wasn't good enough to play it. And everybody says, I want to be an NFL scout. Well, that's easy to say. It's very hard to do. But by the time the early 90s rolled around, I ended up going to graduate school, secured a graduate assistantship at University of Illinois at the time when a man named John Makovic was the head coach, who'd been an NFL coach. And so his claim to fame at Illinois was he was the one that was able to lure Jeff George away from Purdue. Fred Akers, the coach at Purdue, who, once again, is a man with a name known in Texas, right? But at Purdue, he tried to change, right? He tried to open his offense up to try to keep Jeff George. Well, it wasn't open enough, apparently. So Jeff George decided to, take his eligibility and make his way to us down in Champaign-Urbana. And he had 2 really great seasons there. And Makovic really worked a lot with him. And I didn't realize how hard it was to coach Jeff George, so I saw pro coaches try to do it. So hats off to John Makovic, who managed to mostly get the best out of Jeff George. But while I was there, I got to work under one of the great defensive minds I've ever known, a man named Lou Tepper. And Lou Tepper wrote several really good books about defensive football, including one called The Complete Linebacker. If you want to read one of the great books about linebacker play, read Lou Tepper's The Complete Linebacker. Man, that guy knows linebackers. And he produced several of them that played in the NFL, including guys like Derek Brownlow, Simeon Rice, safety named Henry Jones, who played about 7 or so years in the NFL. A couple of the guys on that team that made the league. Who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting someone I shouldn't be forgetting. But, Kevin Hardy. And Kevin Hardy came off that particular team when I was there. We're all on the team. But then I had nowhere to go after that, right? The internet doesn't exist yet. So I just wrote stuff, and sometimes for various, magazines, whatever, but sometimes just notebooks piled full of notes about RJ Soward, for whatever reason, all these stuff about Butler by Note, right? Just notebooks full of players. And, but then the internet luckily comes around, right? So I don't have to just have notebooks full of players. I start hopping on the old BBSs, right? The old bulletin board services, arguing with young Todd McShay and whatever other people about various things. And eventually I find my way to Consensus Draft Services, which was founded by a man named Steve Martin. And he ran it for several years. And he eventually went to another venture and bequeathed it to me, for lack of a better putting it. We had a website, www.cdsdraft.com, for several years from about 1997, 6, 5, somewhere around there, until about 2012-ish, 11, whatever, something like that. Yeah, about 2012. We had we had an early mock draft simulator. We had a really good, interesting consensus board concept, hence the name Consensus Draft Services. So we would develop a consensus board together. And then the thing that I thought we did was most interesting was called GAPS, which stood for the Guru Accountability Project. And so what we used to do was keep tabs on all the quote-unquote draft gurus, right? Including Kuiper, John McClain, Palmer Hughes, Jerry Jones, not the Jerry Jones you're thinking, but the guy that used to put out the drugstore list, who was a Claremont, Ohio pharmacist, well, later retired pharmacist. That was called the drugstore list because he was a guy that ran a drugstore. Howard Balzer, the late great Joel Buxbaum, all the, and we would keep track of like, here's what they said, and then years later we go back and say who's actually the most accurate, who's the most effective. We almost always ended up going with Buxbaum. He usually won, or wherever you would put it, until unfortunately he passed away. But we just looked at the accuracy basically of what they said about players and how it played out versus how the players actually performed in their NFL careers. That was one I was most proud of. And then the thing I started there, that was actually one of my pet projects that I still kind of do on the side, is called the All Underappreciated Team. We did the first one in, what year was it? Chris Gokong was in the draft. Whatever year it was that Chris Gokong came out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, was the first year we did it. And it was a first, second, third, and an honorable mention of players that we thought were the most sort of slept on players. So a player could play their way off the team by being embraced basically by the consensus. So a guy might start out the year on the preseason all underappreciated team. By the end of the year, when everybody's like, oh, this guy's amazing, it's like, okay, we are off, right? We have to replace you with somebody who's still underappreciated. So that was the fun part of it, was like trying to see how many players we really liked were still not being embraced by the people who were supposed to be able to tell who the good players are. So I can remember some of the guys, like Austin Lane from Murray State was one of the guys who was like, I think he was like defensive player of the year of the All Underappreciated Year team one year. Who else has been on it? I mentioned Chris Gokong. Clay Harbor, right, was on it one year. Oh man. There's a running back I'm thinking. Ryan Moats. Was on our underappreciated team. He was I think it was a running back of the year one year for the All Underappreciated team. So did that website. Also hooked up with a man named Bill Chackus, ran Football Reporters Online. Later wrote for a e-zine of the NFL Players Association called Pro Player Insider. I'm leaving people out. There was something called Fan IQ, which is this really, really cool sports site that got bought out and killed by Facebook because Facebook kills everything it touches. But it was a fantastic website, and we were all excited initially when we thought we were going to be acquired, and we can now get paid, whatever. But Facebook killed it. But it was a really cool site. I met some cool people. I'm still friends with some of them, so I'm not too upset about it. But it could have been so much cooler, so much better. I ran a little draft community back. Once again, another thing that got killed by corporate negligence. There used to be something called Yahoo 360 back in the day, and it was this, I thought, brilliant thing because it was somewhere between Twitter and Facebook. It wasn't quite as like grandma weird-ish as Facebook could sometimes be. Your grandma wasn't really going to be on Yahoo 360. And it wasn't quite as like polarizing. And plus, this is back in the the original character limit, so you didn't have these. You could write more long form stuff on Yahoo 360. I felt like it was easy to make it visual and fun and whatever. So it was better than MySpace, more and easier to use, at least in my opinion, than MySpace. It let you do more long form stuff than Twitter, and it was not quite as like you might run into your grandma. Like on Facebook. So I thought it was going to be this great thing. I put a lot of work into it, and then they shut it down because Yahoo also kills everything it touches. So I mean, there's a really good documentary somebody made about Yahoo, and it's like, you guys are the worst. Like, they made some of the most astoundingly poor business decisions in the history of history. Yahoo could be literally the biggest thing going, and they've blown it at every turn. But that's a whole other show. Getting to what you're saying about how I got to be me. So I was a tape grinder or whatever term we used for a long time, and then I started looking more and more at how to be better and more efficient. So I got deeper and deeper into looking also at the numbers, particularly production analytics. Physical stuff is good too. I mean, and I look at RAS, but RAS is what's called a gumbo metric. It throws everything in the pot. So because of that, it gets skewed sometimes. A guy can be fantastic across the board, and that's one really bad thing, and it drops him, or the other way around. Guy's kind of meh, and then he has incredibly long arms, or has a 45-inch vertical, and now he looks like he's good across the board, right? Because it doesn't disaggregate. It throws everything in the pot. And I don't mind that. It's cool. It's a fun thing to talk about, but I want to look. I mean, if anyone's ever taken a statistics class or ever taken anything or worked in engineering knows that when you start mixing together different kinds of data, you get further and further from understanding where the problem is or diagnosing things, right? Because you're mixing, you're crossing the streams, I want to disaggregate. I want to find where the strengths and weaknesses are instead of throwing them all in one pot and spicing it and eating it. I want to know what all the ingredients are going into the pot and which ones should matter, which ones should not. And RAS takes that away from you. I love Kent. I'm a big fan of Kent Lee-Platts. I think that Kent Lee-Platt should be revered for what he's done. But for what the work I do, I need the data separated. I want to know how much this matters versus that. So if this guy doesn't make it, I don't want to just look at RAS or RAS. I want to look at his 3-cone, right? Or I want to look at his vertical. Or I want to look at specifically at the ratio. Like if at a particular position, if a guy only has a 32-inch vert, but the 3-cone and the 40 are all good, things like that. I've noticed at wide receiver, that's fine. But like pass rushers with really bad verticals almost never work out. But shout out to T Sizzle, to Terrell Suggs, because, hey, sometimes it does. But generally speaking, there's things that set off alarm bells. And so I want to find which things those are. And then the thing that most people ignore is production. But they don't. Let me put that differently. People misunderstand production. They think, oh, wow, this guy had 0 sacks. This guy had 8 sacks. Sacks are cool and fun. And I love them, but they're not a good predictor of future success from any player, right? Whether it be linebackers, defensive linemen, defensive tackles. But solo tackle market share is a great indicator. And so I'm going to mention a man named Justin James Watt, who I essentially understand is a secular saint, I believe, in the state of Texas.
Pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that he may be up for beatification, I believe. So, and if you look at his tackle for loss numbers and his sack numbers, they're solid, but nothing to get excited about. But look at his solo tackle market share for the position he plays. He's got solo tackle numbers like linebackers. And that was how I knew he was going to be, at very worst, a very good player with a chance to be great. Why does solo tackle market share work so well in finding good football players? Because they're around the ball, right? They're around the ball. Tackles for loss and sacks, there's lots of things that can go into you not getting a sack or you getting a sack. You can make the play but not get the sack. We see it all the time. But if you're getting solo tackle market shares, it means you're getting there first. You're around the ball before everyone else. You're not cleaning it up, right? So a lot of times when a guy's get a sack or a guy's get a tackle for loss, it's because somebody chased him into him, right? We've seen that a million times where it's like, this guy makes the play, but he doesn't make the tackle. If you are a guy that is getting a very high percentage of solo tackles, not assisted tackles, solo tackles, that means that you're getting there first, right? To quote the general Jubal Early, right? Get there firstest with the mostest. That guy who does that consistently throughout his career in college almost never fails. Almost never. If the closest thing to a zero bust thing on defense is finding a guy with a super high solo tackle market share. At the very worst, you're going to get a guy that ends up having an okay career. I'll tell you another guy that's one of my youth success stories for that particular metric is Malcolm Rodriguez, who I fell completely in love with last year and was desperately hoping that the Steelers would pick him. And I was so upset when he didn't get picked by them. But he went to the right place, though. He went to a team that really loves him and understands him and lets him be himself. And then as a bonus, he's a 2-time state champion wrestler in a wrestling state, right? Oklahoma's a state where they take wrestling seriously, along with, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Arizona, a handful of others. If you win 2 state championships in a state like Oklahoma, you are a badass. Like, I don't know how else to put it. So you add that to his production, to his mindset, because one thing about wrestlers, and once again, I'm not just saying this because I was a wrestler, but in addition to understanding leverage, having great balance, and being incredibly well conditioned, you really, really, really have a good amount of mental toughness. Because wrestling sucks. I mean, like it's 12 minutes. Like in practice, we wrestle, right? We'd wrestle for 12-minute drills. You're dying.
Yeah.
Dying. I mean, it's the worst feeling. There's nothing in football like it. I could play double overtime in football and not feel that kind of lactic acid builds up. 12 minutes of wrestling? Are you kidding me? It should be it should be literally like a crime, like a violation of the Geneva Convention. Wrestling coaches should be prosecuted. 12 minutes of wrestling? Come on. So when you see someone who has that in their background, I always give guys a little extra. First of all, multi-sport athletes, and we see this, shout out to my guys at Tracking Football. We see this every time the Super Bowl rolls out. They say, here's how many people on the starting lineup are multi-sport athletes. Being a multi-sport athlete is always good. One is because versatility is great. It also reduces the chance of overuse injury. There's every reason in the world. I hate it when people tell kids to specialize. Don't do that. Do as many sports as you can for as long as you can. But it means that you are developing other things that you wouldn't just develop if all you did was football drills, if all you did was lift, if all you did was run. You're going to develop as a football player, don't get me wrong, but there's things about playing baseball, right? Look at some of the great ball trackers in the NFL. A bunch of those guys are good baseball players. Arthur Brown Jr., right? Drafted by the Padres. There's a bunch of those guys who I mean, a lot of really good basketball players. I mean, obviously, all the tight ends were basketball players. Almost all of them were great basketball players. I really think that people need to look at totality because everything matters. When I hear people say, oh, I don't pay attention to that, it's like, well, why not? I mean, like all the information is your friend if you make it your friend. If you focus on just a handful of things, well, one, you'll have a certain amount of success because you look so hard at those things, but you'll miss other things. I try to look at everything. Is that exhausting? Yes, it is. I'll just have to be exhausted. But it's worth it, right? So, yes, I want to know what kind of high school offense or defense they played in. Did they play multiple positions in high school? I want to know, obviously, multi-sport. I want to know, if they have had to overcome challenges, difficulties, and problems. Are they guys who were team captains? Were they multiple team captains? Were they voted on by their teammates or were they appointed by their coaches? That's a huge difference. If anybody here, and I think at least some of you here probably played team sports, it's different when a captain's elected by their teammates versus the coach saying, well, this guy's a team captain. Oh, right. Okay, awesome, great. It's a very different thing because when the teammates say this guy's a team captain, that guy's really a team captain. You know what I mean? Like that's not some I'm the coach's favorite thing. That's somebody who truly was respected by their peers. How do we know? Because they said, this is our team captain. This is the guy we follow. Yeah. We follow this player. As opposed to someone saying, oh, look, he's got great grades. He's a really good player. Oh, and the coaches love him. Boom, team captain, right? Which happens sometimes too. But I want to know everything. I want to know it all. And so that drive to want to know everything, and I'll never get there, right? It's that relentless pursuit of the thing you'll never catch. But if you want to know it all, it'll push you to know as much as you can.
All right. Well, guys, I hate this part because, like Kershaw says, it's the end. So, Bill, why don't you tell us where we can find your great stuff and your social media?
I will do so. So, I have 2 Twitter feeds, no waiting. But the main one is that one right there, at 11 Bravo, at ELEVENBRAVO 138, which is a tribute to my old wrestling weight class and my old MOS. For those of you who have military backgrounds or military family members, you'll know exactly what that is. And then my other one, my backup or whatever, is at B Carroll. So it's at BCARROLL 138. Once again on Twitter. You can find, I'm dropping a couple of videos tonight, in fact, on Zenny62 Media. So that's on Twitter, it's at Zenny62. So at Zenny, ZENNIE 62. And it's mostly YouTube stuff. So it's this YouTube channel is Zenny62 Media on YouTube. And then I've got draft stuff, including mock drafts, player breakdowns, position rankings. Oh, and the 9th annual mock draft of Palooza will all be coming up and powered by or influenced by or in conjunction with Team NBS Sports. And on Twitter, that's at Team NBS Sports. And they also have a YouTube channel, which is Team NBS Sports or Team NBS. There's more than just sports now, which is why they changed the name from Nuts and Bolts Sports to Team NBS. We've got culture and music and film and politics stuff now too, and even food. We have a food reviewer now, so even food is now on our site. This is some, as you just said, young man. This is my favorite time of the year. Like I can barely wait. I wake up very, very early, stupidly early every morning, and I'm breaking down tape. I'm working on things. I'm bothering agents. I'm bothering actually, I've stopped bothering my NFL scout friends because this time of year, I know they're going to lie to me and they tell me I have to lie to you. So, I don't need them to lie to me at this point. They stopped telling the truth probably back towards like end of November, into December, because, lying season kicks in no longer after that. So anything you hear, take it with 2 metric tons of salt from this point.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. BT, where can we find you at?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at BrownChubbyBear. You can find my latest article at fanbattlesports.com. You can find my latest video also at Texans Fan Battle on the YouTube channel. It's the 2021 draft grade. So I did a video of how Casario performed on the 2021 draft class. You can find that at YouTube, again, at the Texans Fan Battle YouTube channel.
Yeah, make sure you subscribe, hit that button. Quick word, Crenshaw, where can we find you at, brother?
F4 Crenshaw.
I need to stop for you.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
All right. And of course, guys, you can find me at A1 Day One Texans. You can find the podcast at Texans Fan Battle. And also, like BT said, check us out on fanbattlesports.com. We drop all of our podcast info and some great blogs. Even though if you don't like the Colts have a pretty good one, and as well as the Titans. So make sure you check that out. And guys, until next week, we'll see you later. Have a good night. Again, thank you for coming on, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. We learned a lot.
I'm already following you. I'm about to throw follows at the two of you, so I'll be talking to you guys. And if anyone's interested in being part of a live 7-round mock draft spread over 3 days, let me know.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate
Okay.
it.